Welcome, everyone, to GeekyJustin Live, the only show where you get to watch me drink hot tea in geeky mugs every week. Unless you're listening in on the podcast, in which case you only get to listen to me drinking hot tea in geeky mugs every week. So just for you on the podcast, here you go. I'm here today with Julie Rodgers. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Justin.
How are you?
I'm pretty great. It's really great to see you. It's great to be here.
It's great to see you too. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but I think at least partly about spiritual trauma, healing from spiritual trauma, which is something that you and I were talking about. You said you would really love to talk about it, and I think that is a fascinating topic. So I'm excited to get to that. But first, for folks who do not know who Julie Rodgers is, can you maybe give us the short summary of kind of your pretty amazing journey?
Yes. So I grew up in a really conservative evangelical community in Texas, a little town called Tomball. And I knew that I was gay by the time I was like 11 or 12, as many of us did. And but I had grown up in a community where, you know, my family was very much shaped by leaders on the religious right, like Jerry Falwell, James Dobson, people who said that gay people were an abomination and that we were sort of like, that gay people were out to destroy the family and that AIDS was a sign of God's wrath and just like really horrendous things about LGBT people. So I kind of wrestled with that for a while. I really loved Jesus. I was really moved by the sort of this idea that the God of the whole universe, like that created the pond that I would go fishing in and the stars in the sky, that God came to this earth to be with me and especially to be with people who were excluded and misunderstood. And so I was really drawn to Jesus, and I knew that I was gay. I kind of sat with that for a few years. And then by the time I was 16, on Valentine's Day of my junior year in high school, actually, I felt like I absolutely had to tell my family because it was just getting to a point where I was so torn by this sort of secret that I was holding inside. So I came out to my mom, and a few days later, the next week, she picked me up from school early and said we had an appointment, and she took me to meet with a minister who was also the executive director of an ex-gay ministry in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We were in Dallas by then. So ex-gay ministries, like I know you're familiar with, were sort of, it was a member ministry of Exodus International, which sort of told this message that you could find freedom from homosexuality, that you could sort of, through the process of pastoral counseling, healing prayer, support groups, and things like that, begin to sort of mend your childhood wounds that they said created, that caused you to be attracted to the same sex, and experience a sort of healing and a shift in your orientation to become straight. So I devoted myself very passionately to that process, and I spent almost a decade in this organization. Essentially, it's sort of like Christian conversion therapy, but just not by a licensed professional therapist, so by a minister. And was still gay. I was still very, very gay. Never was able to change. I met some incredible... Are you sure? Super sure. Some of my best friends, though, I met through that organization, though, because they knew what it was like to be not straight and to love Jesus. And as much as I wish we could have met in a different context that really loved and welcomed and accepted us the way we were, I'm still thankful for those relationships at that point in my life, and that they continue today. So by the time I was in my mid-20s, I was like, wow, I'm still super gay. And not only am I still super gay, but a lot of my friends have been really harmed by this teaching. I had one friend that I was running into who was homeless. He had gotten addicted to meth and just kind of turned to quite a few friends who turned to really sort of destructive coping mechanisms to deal with all the shame that they felt. And so So in kind of seeing like a pattern of how the shame led so many people to really despair of their very lives, I got to a point where I said, I can't be a part of this anymore. This is damaging. And sort of started doing work sort of within those organizations to try to change those narratives. Shortly after that, I found a group of people who were openly gay and committed to lifelong celibacy. A really thoughtful, incredible group of people. A guy named Wesley Hill, who does a lot of writing and speaking on this topic, and he's still a dear friend today. I love him. So that they kind of created a community where I could tell the truth about my sexuality and my ongoing gayness, and also still stay within my conservative evangelical communities. Like that was a little bit, I was kind of pushing it for those communities. They were uncomfortable with the fact that I called myself gay, and they didn't like the fact that I was kind of trying to have a positive narrative around and share a positive narrative around what it meant to be gay and to love Jesus. But they were at least like, okay, she's single and celibate, and that's, and sort of living within traditional views of marriage. So through sort of doing some writing and speaking with them, I ended up on staff at Wheaton College, working in the chaplain's office with LGBTQ students. And they were just the most incredible, hilarious, courageous, witty, really resilient students in the world. And I'm just, they really, they moved me in so many ways. And it was through sort of seeing the effect of the teaching, the effect of the traditional teaching and the way it plays out in many conservative Christian communities, the effect of that teaching on like really vulnerable young people. These students in particular moved me in such a way that I felt like I couldn't be a part of those systems anymore. That the right thing to do was to say that Jesus loves them without qualification, without condition. And I saw that that many of my friends, including these students, they were healthier when they were in communities that said, we are with you and for you, and we love you, whether you're dating somebody, whether you're single, whatever that looks like we are here to just walk with you towards Jesus. And that led to really a lot of life and flourishing for so many LGBT people I knew. And so I came out in support of same-sex relationships sort of from a theological, biblical perspective, not just politically. And that was about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago. And in doing so, I couldn't continue in that role at Wheaton, and I couldn't continue doing a lot of the speaking and activism that I was doing in those kinds of conservative evangelical communities. But I ended up with my wife. I met my wife, Amanda, pretty quickly after that. A few months later, we connected on Twitter, of all places. And we started dating. I was living in Chicago. She was living in DC. And we met up when she was in Chicago on business and started this sort of like, we just randomly fell into this relationship. And she's just an extraordinary, incredible person. And I was like, I had not planned on dating, and I certainly hadn't planned on dating that quickly. But I was just like, she's like too good to like I'm not like, I can't like try to figure out my life and then come back to this, because she's like what I want my life to be. Like I want to share this with her and kind of figure it out with her. And so I moved to DC shortly after, 6 months, 7 months later, and we are now raising 2 cats together, and I say happily living a stereotype. And we got married at the Washington National Cathedral, where we're really involved last fall. And so that's the 10-minute version, I guess.
That's fantastic. So you've been on a lot of different sides of this question about the place of gay and bi folks, especially I think gay folks in conservative Christian spaces, in the church at large, the ex-gay side, the what a lot of folks would term the side B celibate crowd, and now married in a same-sex relationship with cats who will probably be traumatized by being raised by two women because they really need male influence in the home. Um, so you've been on all sides of this, but when you and I were talking about you coming on the show and us talking about this, one of the things that you said was that you didn't want to just talk about your story, which I really appreciate. And I wonder if you would mind saying just briefly, like, why? What is it about just coming on and talking about the past that you didn't want to do?
I think there's a lot of the church has not responded well to LGBT people, and there's a lot that I think they've done they've caused a lot of harm and a lot of damage and a lot of trauma in my life and in a lot of the lives of friends and people I love. And it can be easy to sort of dwell there and just be victims, because we have been victims in many ways, and to just get angry and sort of fester and share like war stories. And I think there's a place for that. I've definitely have a lot of friends who have heard a lot of war stories over and over and watched me cry a lot. But I also, I'm interested in being a part of a conversation about how we heal and what we're moving toward, and not just how bad society was to us, or our communities were to us. And so yeah, well, I think that's a really important conversation, and I think it's something that it's work that all of us need to be doing. I'm just not sure. I don't know that my role is to continue to rehash my my personal sort of process of being hurt and wounded, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. So, there are lots of things that I could ask you about the ex-gay movement and about your perspective on all of that. But in light of what you've just said, let's not talk about that for now. Let's talk about this idea of spiritual trauma. You said that you wanted to talk about healing from spiritual trauma and what that looks like for us. And that's something that really resonates with me, and I imagine resonates with a lot of folks we both know. First, let me ask, I guess, how do you define spiritual trauma? Like, what does that mean? You don't even have to define it, but like, what does that mean to you when you talk about spiritual trauma? Like, what is spiritual trauma?
Yeah, I think so. I use the language of spiritual trauma because I feel like there's another term that could be used, which would be religious abuse. And I haven't worked out quite like how I would define that. And abuse is such a strong term and accusation. It feels more like if you were abused, then there was somebody doing the abusing, and that becomes like a really big thing. Where spiritual trauma, you can experience trauma that isn't quite as pointed, I guess. And so that's something I'm still working out in my own process. But I'm not ready to like level those kinds of accusation against individuals that have been in my life yet. I just know that I came out of those communities really wounded, and there was a lot of there's a lot that needed to be healed and mended. And so there was trauma that happened somewhere. And I think I also, as much as possible, I want to move away from directing my anger at people who were in my life, and to look more at the sort of systems and broader narratives that created the conditions for behave that way. And I think that, the language of experiencing trauma is, allows us to look at the bigger, broader, society and movements that cause people to behave in such a way that hurt me and a lot of people I love, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm going to echo what one of our viewers just said. Joe says, you are awesome, Julie. And I agree, you are awesome. And I should say, because I didn't say this at the beginning, that so now, having been through all this, now you're doing writing and speaking, and you've become, I think, a leader and a symbol for a lot of folks who have been on similar paths and are, I think in many cases struggling with this kind of spiritual trauma that you're talking about, like this sense of there's this pain. And I really like what you just said about not wanting to just focus on directing it at a particular person, because I do think that that's a natural thing that we do when we're hurting, to figure out who's to blame. And maybe we're right. Maybe that person is to blame, but I agree with you. I don't know that it's, in most cases, at least, super helpful to like just point fingers. I say most in most cases, because there are always exceptions, and I don't want somebody to say, wait, now,
Yeah.
But so a lot of us have been hurt, and we've been hurt by the institutions that we love. And in when you're talking about spiritual trauma, we've been hurt by our churches and our faith communities, as Christians, our Christian communities. That makes it really hard to find, I think, to find a way forward as Christians, to have to even know how to do faith, or do church, when you associate music and teachings and church ceremony and reading the Bible and praying and all these things with a time of tremendous pain in your life, and not being able to be honest about who you are, and people encouraging you to lie even, or whatever. I'm trying to figure out how to ask a question that's not just, so Julie, how do we heal from spiritual trauma? But like, really, what have you found that's worked for you?
Yeah. So I'm very much in process, I should say. But the last couple of years, I would say a few things that have really helped is, first, like finding a community of Christians who I could tell the whole truth to. And by that, I mean, admit anything that I felt like I was complicit in, work through what I did believe and didn't believe on a given day, talk about my anger and things like that, and to find a community of Christians that I could do that then, that was right there with me, and that didn't try to give me answers or fix it or give me trite Bible verses to quote at me or anything like that. And one of those communities, I've been a part of this sort of ongoing theological education program based out of San Francisco called the New Begin House of Studies. And I don't know if you're familiar with City Church in San Francisco, but it's a really, really incredible, vibrant community of like kind of progressive-ish, evangelical-ish. I mean, this is a weird space. So, there's a lot of, but in San Francisco, and there's this, they have this sort of a theological ongoing learning community that is sort of trying to figure out some of these questions, like what does it look like to follow Jesus from right now in the 21st century with the internet, and with a lot of people who have been disillusioned by and let down by big institutions, and people that are very much in my shoes and in the shoes of many of the people listening. And it's been great to be able to hear different kinds of theology, to hear different perspectives, various speakers coming in, like Lisa Sharon Harper, and, people who are deeply Christian and love Jesus, and also sort of talking about a way of being in the Christian faith that is very different from the conservative, Southern Baptist sort of message that I grew up with. And so it's helped me imagine ways of living out this faith that are that allow me to be really honest and really human, and to bring my whole entire self to it without feeling like I need to fake something, even if that's faking a feeling to myself, like I would have done before. Growing up, I would have faked a feeling in worship if I needed to feel that in order to survive in many ways. I don't even know if I answer your question, but that's one thing. I'm curious to hear from you too, because you've also been through such a big journey and process, and being so public for so long. Being a professional Christian is its own thing. There's
Yes.
just a lot going on. I'm curious to hear what has maybe what's been healing for you maybe in the last several years.
That's a good question, and I'm gonna cheat by jumping to some of the comments that our viewers are sending in while I think about how best to answer your question, because I'm not stalling. I'm really just getting to the comments.
That's great.
No, but there have been a lot of great comments coming in. Noreen says, thank you both for your honesty. As a straight Christian, I need to hear this, which I really appreciate, because I wasn't even thinking about that as we were talking about doing this conversation. But it is important for folks who did not experience the same pain and may have their own pain that they've experienced, but like to hear about ways in which other folks have been hurt, but also about the hopeful side of that, of how we're healing from that, to know how they can be part of helping to heal that, and not just feel terrible all the time about the harm that's been done.
Totally.
So thanks, Noreen, for that. Rob wants to know, can you say the name again that you said, which I think was Lisa
the
Sharon
New Begin
Harper.
House of Studies.
Oh.
The New Begin House of Studies is the
Maybe that's what it was.
program, and then Lisa Sharon Harper was one of the speakers we had in. We've had a lot of great speakers, though. It's a really fantastic program.
Okay, cool. Thanks. That may have been actually what he meant. Ashley said a little bit ago, and I really like this comment, so I wanted to get back to it, Ashley. It's hard when people who are causing that harm really believe they are doing what is best. It can make it harder to process, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're exactly right, Ashley. Like I find, when you're talking earlier about not blaming somebody, I find that one of the toughest parts is just what Ashley said, that like if somebody's done something to hurt you, intentionally to hurt you, that's one thing. But if they did what they thought was right, what they thought was helpful, and it was hurtful, what do you do with that?
Yeah. I get mad at James Dobson. So I direct all the anger that I need to direct on an individual. I usually direct to James Dobson. But so a couple things. One, I found myself after the 2016 election feeling absolute rage toward a lot of evangelicals, because I was just like, did you really just reject me and my friends who spent like decades trying to be like good enough, and then turn around and embrace Donald Trump? Like, is this really what we're doing? And I felt so angry. But I realized that a lot of that anger was coming from, I was basing this on comments I saw from Facebook friends, like somebody I might have known, a really long time ago, who's like, maybe been on a different path for a long time. Or I would base it on like quotes, seeing Jerry Falwell on Twitter. Like I was looking to sort of extreme examples and letting that fuel my anger toward all, like, this whole entire group of people, a whole entire, like, almost religion. And when I look to Jesus, though, and when I look to scripture, and when I look at the ways that people, just knowing myself too, like how people can mean well, and they can have really good intentions, and they can be trying to love somebody, and they can just fail to do it well. And they're not Jerry Falwell. And it's harder in some ways, because it would be easier to be able to write them off as bigots. But it's also, I think, a really rewarding process to try to figure out why they are the way they are and why they believe what they believe, and to try to see the good and the humanity in them in the same way that I want them to see the humanity in me. And I think it's ultimately it's really hard being human. Like there's so much we don't know. We all experience grief, we all experience loss, and even the people who have hurt me, I think they feel, some people that are very close to me that have not been able to continue in relationship with me, that's hurting them too. And they are also suffering as a result of this teaching that they did not come up with on their own, that they heard from somewhere. And so again, I directed to James Dobson.
It's interesting. We could probably have a whole conversation about James Dobson, because he was such an influential force in my life growing up, in your life. Somebody else in the comments I know has mentioned James Dobson being influential in their life. And I don't want to get too much into a conversation about James Dobson, but like when I first was coming out and realizing that I was gay, I went through and I listened to a lot of stuff, and I still have a lot of tapes of old Focus on the Family programs. And I should say, for anybody who doesn't know who James Dobson is, he was for many years a very influential evangelical leader who started out as a child psychologist and became just this voice of authority on all things Christian for a lot of evangelicals across America. And I listened to some old Focus on the Family broadcasts, and one of the things that was really frustrating to me was that I believe in grace for all people. I believe in grace for James Dobson too. But I do think this is not something I've said publicly, and but it seemed to me, listening to these shows, that James Dobson had a lot of the knowledge, a lot of the evidence in front of him that he needed to be more nuanced in what he was saying, and made the decision not to be. And that affected a lot of people who had not spent the time with the subject matter that he had. And that is frustrating. That's frustrating.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, there's so many good questions coming in. I saw a really good one from John and from Tyler, and Riley's got one. But I want to answer your question before I forget. So you had asked me, I've forgotten now what you asked me. You asked me what's something or someone or a practice or thing that's helped you heal to some degree from maybe spiritual trauma in your own life? Yeah. It has been a much more difficult journey for me, I think, than I like to let on, because of the very thing that you said a few minutes ago about being a professional Christian. I found my calling really early in my life, as a young adult, being an openly gay Christian who was speaking to the most conservative parts of the church and speaking to evangelicals and other conservative Christians, because that's where I came from. That was, that's the language that I speak. I didn't grow up Catholic or Episcopalian. Like I grew up Southern Baptist, and I speak that language. I know, Dobson stuff backwards and forwards. And so I found my calling really early on, speaking to that part of the church as an openly gay person. But I also found really early that as I was doing that there was a lot of pressure to prove that I was a real Christian in all the right ways.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this sense of like, I worried that if I were to say or do anything that strayed from the party line in any way on anything, that I would lose my my cred. And so it's been really important to me to be honest, like not to claim to believe things I don't believe. Like I've been, like everything that I've presented to the world, the things that I've written about and the things that I've said are all true. So I don't mean in any way to say like, so I had to like create this false thing, because I didn't.
Totally.
But there also is this sense of like, kind gosh, like what if I change my mind on some point of doctrine or something? What do I do with that? I can't even think about it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pressure to be super Christian all the time. And so, yeah, that's been a struggle for me. I think in some ways I found my solace in that work, which is not super healthy. And I think probably the best thing for me has been along the lines of what you said, finding other people, other Christians to walk that journey with me, other Christians who understand what it's like. I don't know though. I feel like there's probably still a lot that I haven't fully dealt with. A lot of pain that I've just turned into advocacy so that other people don't have to go through it. And sometimes it comes out of me in unhealthy ways where people are like, oh, you have so much grace for, these people. And I'm like, you have no idea the effort. Like, it's not that I'm such a good person. Like that's, that takes effort. And then I've had on a few occasions, I've had people, I didn't mean to take the subject this way, but I've had people say like, criticize me on more than a few occasions because I was too nice to somebody that they saw as an oppressor. And that's when sometimes I would find my anger and my frustration rising up where I just want to like shake people and be like, do you understand how hard that is for me? Like you think that I'm discounting the damage that they've been done, but they did it to me too. And like, so if I'm being nice to them, it's not because I don't recognize the pain. It's because I do. And I am doing everything I can to work through that pain, to speak on behalf of other people in a way that I can be heard.
Yeah.
Sorry, that just...
No, it's so true. It's so true. Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. Okay, I want to get to some of these great questions that people have sent, if I can find them. I'm scrolling back through all of this great stuff that people have been saying. Here's a question from John that is taking things in a little different direction. John says, Julie, how would you suggest I approach my hurt gay son who has walked away from his faith? He knows how much I love him, but I long for his relationship with Jesus. This is a question that I get a lot when I speak places. People ask me, what do I do about, like, my child grew up in the church, they were hurt by the church, and now they want nothing to do with the church. How do I fix that? And I know what I say, but what would you say to that? Your answer might be better than mine.
Yeah. At first I love the sort of the spirit in which that's asked, this sort of love for his son. And, I think it's important to recognize that he has walked away because he's been deeply, deeply hurt. And just because he's walked away from a community or like an actual sort of like church building or whatever, doesn't mean that he has is sort of done with Jesus. And I think for a lot of people that I've known, they need some time and space between the sort of pain and suffering they endured in a church and a sort of return or walking into a really authentic, sincere, beautiful faith. And I think the best thing to do is to continue to love him exactly where he is, exactly the way he is right now. And by love, just like hanging out, having food, sharing good times together, not love like send Bible verses or, sort of, I think a lot of times like, out of a sense of like fear, parents can come on a little bit strong and wanting to like have conversations that he might just not be ready to have because he might just need to heal. And I think that if you can continue to provide that safe place and that love and to represent the love of Jesus in his life. And it's definitely continue to pray for him. I think in doing that and respecting his own journey and the path that he needs to be on right now, it's likely that when he lays his head down at night, he sometimes prays. And it's likely that he's going to come up against some sort of pain or loss, or just big questions in the future that he will likely sort of lean back on the teaching, the spiritual tradition he comes from, for guidance, for moral guidance. And I think it's good to have established just a healthy, loving, fully accepting relationship for when those times might come. So he might sort of turn to you all for to be conversation partners in that, rather than almost pushing him a little further away by, bringing your anxiety to him. That's my initial thought, but I'm curious what your answer is to that, Justin.
I mean, yours is way better than mine.
No.
No, it is, seriously. I'm gonna have to go back and replay that and make some notes for the next time I get asked that question. I thought that was a great answer.
Oh, that's kind.
I mean it. Generally, I just try to come up with something in the moment about that. I mean, I agree with you about space and the need to let folks be on their own journey, because you can't force somebody into a place that they're not ready to be, and you have to trust God with that. And I think so many of us, we know, you and I, how hard it is to stay in communities of faith after, going through all this kind of stuff, because you really do see, I feel at least speaking for myself, I feel I've seen the best of Christianity and the worst of Christianity.
Yeah, actually, that is true.
and it's I hear people say I mean, how can you be a Christian when, you know these things about the worst of Christianity? I'm yeah, no, I feel that. And had I not seen all the good stuff, all the best stuff, I probably wouldn't be. But it's difficult to balance all of that, or to even know what to do with all of that.
Yeah.
Riley wants to know, I was raised in a Southern Baptist church after they had a revival. After they had a revival when I was out of town. Now I'm getting pushed out of my church if I don't change. What advice would you give me?
Oh, Riley. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That is a really scary and lonely place to be. And I would say, without having much context, so I don't know how many people you've talked to about this. How many people know in your life. I don't know if there are safe people in your life to be able to share this with. And so it's hard to give specific, feedback to you without some of that context. But I will say that first, remember that no matter what, God loves you. God absolutely delights in you and is for you and with you. And those people that are sort of threatening to reject you in any way, or saying you have to change in order to be loved and welcomed there, those people do not reflect God's love for you. And so I would just encourage you to continually remember every time they say things and do things that are deeply hurtful, that they are not, they're not walking in the spirit of Jesus in doing that. And so the second thing is that if there's anybody, if you have access to anybody who's loving and supportive, I would say spend as much time as possible with them, and to try to lean into the relationships that are really life-giving. And finally, to know that whenever you find yourself independent and able to sort of make decisions for yourself. I don't know if you're still living at home or what that looks like, but there are a ton of other communities. There are thousands and thousands of Christians who will totally love you and just enthusiastically welcome you, regardless of your orientation and regardless of whether you choose to be single and celibate or choose to enter into same-sex relationships. Like, they're just going to be there to delight in you and celebrate you exactly the way you are and to walk with you towards Jesus. So know that there are tons of other communities out there that are deeply, deeply Christian, where you'll be able to belong whenever sort of you get the opportunity to move away from this particular one, even though I know how painful that is. And I know that knowing there are other communities out there does not in any way make it easier to be in one right now, where you're experiencing all of this pressure and so much heartache. And so my heart really goes out to you, and I will be praying for you as you come to mind. I can tell you that.
That's such a great answer. This is why people love you, Julie. I'm so appreciative of you right now. Okay, I don't want to just hit you with all the hard questions, but I do have at least one more that I want to ask because it's here from Tyler. Tyler says, I'm so thankful for you, Julie. You are such a gem and helped me to find hope in very dark places. How did you overcome any shame or baggage or judgment associated with moving away from side B?
Thank you, Tyler. First of all, it's really meaningful to hear that. I feel like I worked through a lot of the shame when during my process of moving from like sort of ex-gay and trying to be straight to accepting that I was gay and that was not going to change. Like, that was in many ways a more difficult internal process for me than the process of moving from single celibate side B to being open to dating. And I think that's because, so that second process of, becoming affirming and from the process of moving from side B to side A was much harder relationally. Like, I experienced a lot more hostility and rejection, and that was way more complicated. But I think I felt gross. Like, I felt disgusting. I felt like I was an embarrassment to people, in the communities growing up where I felt like I needed to be straight, to be anything other than gay. And it was really hard to come to terms with the idea that I might not be able to be somebody who, like, that they might never be comfortable with me. And so I think a lot of working through my shame was in finding communities and people who weren't grossed out by me, who didn't think I was an embarrassment or didn't think I was disgusting or weren't like freaked out about having to share a bed when we went to a hotel. You know what I mean? Like, just like normal things, like people who really, especially Christians who really just loved me and didn't think I was weird or anything like that. Like, it was those kinds of relationships that helped me to work through so much of that shame. And I think like this kind of like so much of the shame I've experienced as a result of relationships where I was judged and pushed away. And I think, like in many things, if the pain sort of came from relational wounds, then the healing is going to come from healthy and life-giving relationships. And so there wasn't like a book I could have read that would have replaced like those really deep friendships that came along when I needed them.
So there are more questions coming in, but I want to ask you something or talk about something with you. So when we were kind of doing some advanced chatting about doing this conversation, you made a comment that really resonated with me about the challenge of, and forgive me, I can't say exactly what you said, but at least how I heard it was about the twin challenges of having the boundaries set by your faith, your spiritual group, gone to the extent that you no longer trust that group to set boundaries. and having a lot of pain, anger, even rage, that you're trying to figure out how to work through. And kind of when you said that, like, it immediately made me think about how, for me, what I believe about how to respond to pain and how to respond to people who have hurt me comes from my faith, taught to me by the same people who taught me that being gay is a choice and a sin.
Mm.
And I find that I sometimes see other people whose lives have been very similar to mine. I can think of other people I know who are, gay, cis, white men with similar backgrounds to mine, who deal with their anger, their rage at what they were taught in a way that I think is unhealthy. That I certainly have had the temptation to respond similarly, but I don't think it's healthy. But I think, well, gosh, like if I say, well, I think as a Christian, I should do this or that, they're like, yeah, well, I don't want to hear about that, because like, that's the people who taught me that were wrong about everything. Like, it's a weird place, because where do you find your anchor? Like, what anchors you to know even how to deal with the pain that you're dealing with? I guess I should ask, is that what you meant by what you said, if you even remember what you said? And, or like, how have you dealt with that in your life?
Yeah. I mean, that's big. I would say, I don't know if this answers that question, but, I think one of the responses to that kind of anger and pain can be to just check out and to be kind of done. And I know a lot of people who have like, just sort of like, walked away from the church and, religion and things like that, and are just, trying to sort of, find their way. And, I totally get that. And there have been times in my own life when I'm like, do I believe this? Like, is this something that, if I've gone through like this much, if they were wrong about this many things, and in many ways, like, wrong in ways that were like manipulative and hypocritical, like, how do I know they weren't wrong about everything? And, ultimately what I've come back to time and time again is, first of all, like that I experienced one sort of strain of a very, very big family with a long history, a massive movement called Christianity. And there are a lot of different ways to be a Christian, and there are a lot of different ways to understand the Bible, and there are a lot of different ways to express that faith and practice that faith. And so I have found, I've sort of leaned into different traditions than Southern Baptist evangelical to find, ways that resonate or that are much more life-giving for me, where my faith can really breathe. And so part of the reason that I've done that is because first, like when I encounter Jesus, and I just see this incredible human God being that embodies everything that I could ever hope to know and become a little more like. And I see compassion, and I see generosity, and I see humility, and I want to move toward that way of being in the world that Jesus models and that Jesus is. And I think, like, I would hate to let my anger at a certain sect of Christians, I would hate to let that get the best of me, so much so that I can't move toward this Jesus who has so deeply captured my heart and imagination. And so I try to find, things, whether that's books or communities or denominations, whatever it might be, that is going to like foster more of a sense of love for Jesus. And I move away from the ones that get in the way of by relationship with Jesus. And so in doing those things, I feel like there's space to begin to heal. And the other thing I would say is I think like a lot of people that I know, it's not a given that we're going to naturally develop in positive ways and become better versions of ourselves. It's not a given that I could begin sort of like mapping out my own sort of ethics and like moral compass, and that's actually going to point in a positive direction. And it's not because I'm like a Calvinist who just thinks like we're trash and we're born trash and we'll always be trash except for the grace of God. It's just that I know myself, and I know that we all do have very limited views of the world. We come from very specific social locations, and we do have like selfish tendencies often. And so I need to be surrounded by other people who are going to be able to point out blind spots and to say, to sort of, give me a fuller picture of what it looks like to move toward what is good and true and beautiful. And so yeah, I mean, I have found that in the church, just a different sort of expression of Christianity than what I grew up with. But I think it's important if people are going to say like, I need a break from that, or I just don't believe it, or and even belief is weird because like Christianity isn't really a belief system. Like it's something we practice. It's something that we do. And so I would even say, even if you don't believe it, you can still practice it. And that often that leads to really positive growth. I'm talking too much, but
no, I think you're saying all the right things.
It's helped me find a community and sort of a way of being that has given me the space to heal. And I think if I had just been like done with it all, it's really easy if I were just kind of be done with it all for that to turn into self-righteousness and just self-righteous rage. And I know that, like I said, it's really hard being human, and we're all doing the best we can. And there's a lot that I'm missing, and I don't want to just, that's probably enough.
I think that humble and nuanced attitude is such a great beacon for the rest of us to emulate. Like, I love what you've just said. I think it's wonderful, and that's why I'm glad that you're here in the world and on this show. This is like fantastic. I am learning from you, and I'm truly enjoying this. So people have more serious questions of you, but I always try to like never let this go by when I can help it, this whole show, and be totally serious the whole time. So I want to ask you about what gives you joy. But first I have to acknowledge this comment, if I can find it, from Jackie, who says, Chip and Dale, because I am drinking from my Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers mug.
That's amazing.
For those of you on the podcast, because, sometimes some crimes go slipping through the cracks, but these two gumshoes are picking up the slack. There's no case too big, no case too small. If you need help, just call Julie Rodgers, because she's got all the answers.
I used to watch that show though. That's amazing. I had not noticed the mug.
I have all kinds of crazy mugs, so this is one. What brings you joy besides Chip and Dale? What brings you joy?
I love just like hanging out with my wife and our cats. My wife, Amanda, is her name. She's so fun, and she's so like emotionally intelligent and like an incredible conversation partner. And so I love just like talking with her. And we have some really, really great friends here in DC. So just being with our friends, like sitting on our deck, talking about life. I also really love running, and running has been a way for a long time for me to sort of like move and like get the endorphins and get things out, and also to sort of contemplate big questions and work through things. I usually work through things that I'm writing while I'm running, and I pray a lot when I run, and so running. And I like reading fiction. Fiction brings me a lot of joy. It's a really great way to get at big questions and you can cry about things, and just very cathartic. So yeah, those are a few things. What brings you joy, Justin?
Um, I've talked about this before on the show, but I like having board game nights with friends. There's I like the idea of getting out of the digital world and focusing on something physical, concrete in the real world with friends, where like we are talking about stuff that has no stakes out there in the world. It's a chance to just unwind, and I appreciate that. I also
Yes.
love, I'm with you on fiction. I love a good mystery. I grew up on Agatha Christie novels, and to this day, I love a good mystery. So,
It's great.
and I have lots of other like geek stuff that I geek out about, which is where the whole GeekyJustin thing comes from. So some of it is on the shelf behind me. People who pay attention to the moving and not moving things on my shelf over these videos can see some of the things that I like. But
Great. I see
um
Clue.
yes, yeah, I am and you can see more stuff than they can see because of the setup that we've got. But
Oh,
I do have I have a Clue collection actually. I have a collection of different editions of Clue through the years
amazing.
from different parts of the world. It's kind of fun.
Amazing.
It's not amazing, but thank you. Okay, Eric has asked, because this is a question that my friend and regular viewer JD always wants to ask to every guest, and Eric has brought it up here, is do you like pineapple on pizza?
No,
All right.
no. Just a
So
hard pass. Hard pass.
Jackie will agree with you. Jackie said no to pineapple on pizza. So I personally, I'm a big fan of pineapple on pizza, but that's okay. I will not serve any to you because
Thank
I will
you.
respect your journey and where you are in the journey. And maybe at some point you will come around to pineapple on pizza, but I'm not going to just like have a relationship with you only in the expectation that that will happen.
I received that. I received that love.
Okay, we're out of time, but I do there were a couple of good questions that I skipped. There were a lot of good questions and comments that I skipped. I apologize again to all of you who had wonderful things to say that we didn't get to. But can I ask you two really quick ones? They're not quick questions, but like try to give the quickest answer that you can.
Okay.
Jericho wants to know, how has counseling or therapy helped you process and heal from spiritual trauma? How much of your healing has been from simple communal support, and how much has been more process-oriented time on the couch? Like, how do you feel about that?
Counseling is amazing, and I cannot possibly recommend it enough. I um, saw one when I was sort of leaving the ex-gay world behind and sort of coming out as gay. And I saw one for several years in the Dallas area who was incredible, and she played such a huge, important role in my life. I still think about things that she sort of taught me that I learned on that couch. And then I'm also like going to go back and see a therapist in DC pretty soon. And I feel like things are going really well. I feel like I'm incredibly blessed and have like rich relationships, and in many ways I'm happier than I've ever been. But I also just recognize that, like, coming from the past that I come from and with all the baggage that I have, that I want to like do a tune up and like go just do a check-in and see, is everything like okay, or could I use some more help sort of sorting through some of those relationships and some of that baggage. So I'm a fan of like ongoing therapy, and I think I'll probably go back many times throughout my life, because it's just nice to have a trained professional who can see things that I don't see, to sort of like speak into my life and suggest ways of being able to grow. So yeah, therapy.
I like that. That's a great answer, and I think really important. Thanks, Jericho, for that question, and thanks, Julie, for that answer. Here's one more quick one. Not quick. We could do a whole hour on this, but Damon wants to know, is it okay if we never completely heal? I will always mistrust and suspect individuals and groups who present themselves as Christians. That's a like a deep and I think really difficult question. Do you have an initial response to
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think I don't think healing is a destination, so I
Mm,
don't think that we will ever reach a healed state in this lifetime, and so it is definitely okay. And I'll even say, like, I was recently thinking, just about my own life, and feeling like I'm so much more cynical than I used to be, and it makes me really sad. Like, I hate that because I used to I was so earnest and I believed so deeply, and I lived in such good faith that what people were saying was true and with the best intentions and of utmost love for me. And I learned that that wasn't always the case, and a lot of times people were willfully misleading and being calculated, and it was just, I felt so foolish. I felt so like foolish, and like I had been so earnest and was like deeply betrayed in many ways. And so as a result, like, a coping mechanism is to then become a little more hardened, a little more cynical. And cynicism is really just like critical thinking, right? But it's critical thinking. I think I read this in Krista Tippett's book. Someone saying cynicism is like critical thinking without hope, and without sort of like charity or something like that. And so what I want to do is recognize that these issues that are the sign that I am not healed. To get back to this question, those issues are coming from like very legitimate places. There's very good reason that I am, that we experience these things the way we do, and it's not the end of the story. I think we can continue to recognize where that's coming from and say, what does it look like to extend the benefit of the doubt to people who have proven themselves to be more trustworthy? Or what does it look like to, begin to step out in hope that maybe at least like God and some Christians are really good and true and beautiful, and that we can trust that God will meet us in that, and that there's life-giving community, even if we can never be sure that we won't be hurt again. But yeah, I guess like I think we can incorporate the sense of hope that God is actively at work in the world, and that there is grace, and there is goodness, and there is beauty, and the sort of damage and betrayal and heartache and the loss that you've experienced doesn't get the last word.
that's beautiful. And I had to laugh because I relate in all the horrible ways to the things that you said. But thanks for saying that. I regret that we don't have time to read all of the truly funny and thoughtful comments that have come in just in the last few minutes, including some very interesting responses to pineapple on pizza. But I will read you this, which is not about pizza, from Debbie, who says, Julie, you came along when I needed to learn to be a better parent. You are so loved and looked up to by so many. And I think that is very true, not only among parents, but among lots and lots of Christians from all stripes and backgrounds who have been inspired by you and your wisdom, and the fact that you are continuing to move forward and work towards healing instead of just staying focused on the past. And I'm just so grateful for you. Thank you for being here. How do people, if people want to follow you and all the stuff that you're doing and bring you to speak and pay you lots of money, how can they do that?
The best way is on my website, because then you can find all my social media and stuff from there. And it's just www.julierodgers.com, and it's RODGERS, like the Dodgers. So julierodgers.com. And yeah, I will be hopefully share. I've been working on a lot of things that are in private Word documents, and I'm excited for those to be public at some point in the hopefully very near future. So yeah, that'd be great to connect there.
Awesome. So everybody go look Julie up at julierodgers.com. And keep in mind that you can find all the past episodes of this show in audio form by searching Geeky Justin Live in iTunes, or in video form at youtube.com/GeekyJustin, or on my website at GeekyJustin.com. I want to say thanks to everybody for watching and listening, and special thanks to all my patrons, especially my Gold Star patrons, Liz, Tom, Christopher, Carol, Bruce, John, Larry, and Terry. And extra special thanks to Julie. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to do this.
Oh, this is so great. Thank you so much, Justin. This was you're really amazing, and I'm really thankful for you. And I'm just excited that we got to do this.
Me too. You're really amazing, and thank you for saying that. And just thank you for all the good that you put out in the world. I'm just so appreciative of you. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Be excellent to each other. Yes. And don't forget the nuance. Good night.